Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Javon Harrington, back to hit you another video. And today, we are going to be continuing What If Deku Was Iron Man? My Hero Academia Armored Adventures Part 2. As always, if you're a fan of Power Core Productions and everything else that we have on the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Where we last left off with this series, Izuku had finally entered into UA, now doing so under his own power with the Iron Man armors that he had built for himself. However, this story will be a little bit different from most, in the sense that I'm trying to create something that's a bit more unique in terms of a My Hero Academia original series as a whole. I want to try to make Izuku a lot more independent. As such, I have not given him one for all in this series, and I think that the series will be better off if I don't give it to him at all. But with that being said though, who do you think should get one for all in this series? I am going to be having a poll come up pretty soon for you guys to vote on who you want to have the power, but let me know down in the comment section below your thoughts and ideas on the story going forward, who you think should get one for all, and where you think the story could potentially go next. Remember, I do read your comments and I do take what you say into consideration, so always make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so that you can always be in the loop for the stories and for everything else that we do on the channel. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get straight into today's video. So, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Following the quirk apprehension test, both Izuku and Shang-Chi would realize that if they were going to fulfill the mission that they were assigned, their destiny, then they were going to have to work together and see what they had so far. Shang would ask Izuku while they were in his laboratory one day after school why his mother didn't seem to be none the wiser as to what was truly going on. Izuku explaining that although his mother was a kind and caring woman, she tended to be a bit overprotective. If his mother knew what was really going on, everything that was truly happening, in all likelihood, she would probably make him abandon his hero's journey, would probably try to hide them away somewhere safe and avoid this whole situation. And while Izuku loved his mother, he knew that this was something he couldn't turn away from. He had to find those who were responsible for his father's death, as well as protecting the rings, being now chosen as its guardian. For both Izuku and Shang-Chi, they would compare notes in the meantime about everything they had been able to learn so far. As Shang noted, he had come to UA as a cover of sorts, having known that he would by chance meet Izuku here, as his mother and Izuku's father knew one another. Izuku would ask Shang why his mother chose to stay behind, Shang acknowledging that that was just for her own safety and protection. While she was fine and could take care of herself, he didn't want to put any more unnecessary burden upon her. Also, deep down he knew that if it really came to a fight, his father would not hesitate to kill his mother, and that was a situation he wished to avoid if at all possible. As the two of them would compare and learn what they had in the meantime, Izuku would come to learn more about Shang-Chi and his abilities. Just like himself, Shang was also quirkless, but he was not weak by any means. Instead, he gained his power in a different way, channeling his inner chi or his inner natural energies, he was able to enhance his strength and speed remarkably to that of superhuman. He was also well versed in many forms of martial arts, as well as capable in fighting with various weapons, making him truly a deadly hero to say the least. When combined with the powers of the fire ring, it truly did enhance and make him much stronger. As for Izuku, he showed off his schematics. Also being quirkless, Izuku decided that using a suit of armor would be the best fit for him. Shang remarked that with the power ring, Izuku could essentially become strong enough to where he didn't need the armor. But for Izuku, he viewed the ring as more of a tool than anything else. He had come to learn that while using it, he could enhance the overall strength of his armors as a whole, allowing him to tank a lot more damage than he could originally. And if worse came to worse, if his armor proved to fail him, he could then use the power ring to his advantage. Although Shang would warn that if he were going to use the ring at all, he had to learn how to train, never knowing when his armor might fail him. And Izuku would take him up on that offer. Of course, he did know basic hand-to-hand combat skills, as it was a way for him to protect himself being quirkless and all, and his mother, fearing for his safety, wanted her son to at least know how to defend himself. So Izuku wasn't completely inept when it came to fighting. It's just that when compared to the likes of Shang-Chi, he were an amateur at best. In the meantime, the boys focused their main goal on finding the other 8 rings, before the Mandarin and his shadows could get to them first. But of course, they had no idea what they were going to do once they found all 8 of them. If they had all 10 in their possessions, that meant that they would either have to hide them away, or they would have to guard them themselves, unless they found others who were worthy enough to take a ring. But that was just a bridge they would have to cross when they get there. As for the class, while it originally had 21 students, the number was reduced to 20, as one student in particular, Minoru Mineta, would decide to drop out and go to general studies, thus evening out the class at 20, with Shang-Chi taking his place. After class, All Might would arrive, introducing himself as the teacher for their hero training. As they were going to be doing a combat simulation, the students would all be given their hero costumes. Izuku's was a special matter. You see, Izuku knew fully well that while his family had the resources, he didn't want to drain them dry just in his pursuit of being a hero. As such, he invested his money in different resources and in different ways to increase his wealth, thus allowing him the funds to be able to keep doing his hero work. What he had come up with was the best case scenario for him. It was a specially made briefcase, a chrome-like red with trims of gold. This briefcase was actually a suit of armor, the Mark I, or the suit of armor that you see in Iron Man 1. This suit was a standard. After a while, Izuku had come to see that the first suit he had was a bit too cumbersome, and in the end of the day, it really didn't do all that much for him in the grand scheme of things. This suit provided better mobility and had decent flight. It used the repulsor rays in both of its palms, as well as the chest beam also. Underneath the armor, Izuku would be wearing the power ring, which would also enhance his overall strength. With all that taken into consideration, this was Izuku's best way to carry his suits in the meantime. The briefcase had a special encryption code, one that only Izuku could unlock, so there was no worry of anyone trying to steal it or hack it or anything of that nature. Though he took great precautions to make sure the suit was well protected at all times, and it even had a defense mechanism if anyone without authorization tried to use it. As Izuku would go to get changed, he would open up the briefcase, placing his 2 hands in the center, the armor would be lifted instantly, grafting onto his body. This armor was the Mark II model, red and gold, but it did serve its purpose for the most part. As everyone saw Izuku's armor, they would compliment him, as they could now see that he had great intellect, some wondering if his intelligence came from an intelligence-based quirk. But Izuku explained that as far as he knew, he was simply quirkless, and this was the best course of action he could take in terms of being a hero. All the same, he would still get looks, none the wiser, Bakugo watching him from a distance. He had wondered what Izuku had been doing for all this time, and to see that the quirkless boy had taken it upon himself to build a suit of armor. Now this intrigued him, although in the end, he was still confident that he would win out between the two of them. The class would then be divided into groups. 2 students would be the heroes and 2 would be the villains. The villains would be in a mock city, inside of a building guarding what was to be known as a bomb. The goal of the villains was to keep the heroes from getting the bomb, and the goal of the heroes were to either subdue the villains or get the bomb within the allotted time. As everyone was paired off and matched up with one another, Izuku would find himself being partnered with Momo Yaoyorozu, the 2 friends excited that they would get to join together once again, and their opponents were none other than Katsuki Bakugo and Kenya Ida. As they made their way to the building, Izuku would use his helmet to scan the area, and eventually he would be able to locate what floor the bomb was on. As he scooped up Momo, he would lift into the air, hovering above until eventually they came to the window, where they would be just 1 floor under where Ida was with the bomb. Izuku would tell Momo to hide off on that level, as he was going to draw out Bakugo, before descending back down a few levels below and making his way in. The red and gold armored hero would make his way through the corridors, walking slowly and analyzing, as he knew fully well that Bakugo was going to be racing towards him. And his calculations were correct, as the explosive hero made his way, the 2 standing face to face. So, you leave off for all this time and you come back with a suit of armor, huh? That's really the best you can do? I think it'll be more than enough against you, Bakugo. But if you don't believe me, why don't you come and find out? Don't get so full of yourself, you damn nerd. I don't care how many suits of armor you make. In the end of the day, you're still just Deku. We'll see. Bakugo would go flying into the air instantly. Izuku expected this, and using his suit, he programmed for every sort of combat he could expect to face. The suit worked more or less in a combination with his mind. The suit would react to Izuku's wishes and do as he responded, thus giving his movements a lot easier fluidity. He was able to counter Bakugo effortlessly and throw him to the ground with a simple judo throw. For Bakugo, he could tell that Izuku had definitely been keeping track with him for some time. The fact that he could even still remember how he fought was a testament to this. But all the same, Bakugo would still continue on in his assault. His explosions were all the more stronger, and while Izuku's armor was definitely able to tank some of them, it seemed as though as the fight progressed, Bakugo's damage was doing more and more effect, at least more than what Izuku was expecting. This was the first time that Izuku's armor was really being put to the paces, as while he had been working on the suit, he had never actually gone into a combat simulation against someone with a quirk. He had only fought against practice robots and dummies, so to actually begin this sort of experience was more so than what he could be expecting. The armor held up its own for the most part, and its charge time was more than enough to suffice, but still Bakugo was not making it easy at all. Eventually catching Izuku off guard, he slammed his large grenade-like gauntlets into his back, slamming him into the ground. Izuku could tell firsthand that Bakugo was more impressive than he could have possibly remembered, and he was wise to not underestimate him as such. As their fight continued though, Izuku would slowly gain the upper hand, and Bakugo could quickly see the disparity between the two of them. The armor was much more impressive than he gave it credit for, and he took some nasty hits because of it. But Izuku took some damage of his own, especially in the left shoulder, Bakugo hitting it with a point-blank explosion, blasting off the shoulder armor and actually doing a lot more damage to Izuku than he originally thought. In fact, he thought that his shoulder might have popped out of its socket, and with no choice, he had to pop it back in instantly, and he could feel a sharp pain shooting through his arm in the process. Meanwhile, Momo would allow the fight to continue on downstairs. As she made her way into the room, she noticed Ida monologuing to himself, and as such, she assessed the situation. Not laughing or giving her position away, she would see and know that the bomb was in the center of the room. Tenya Ida in all likelihood knew that with his speed he could keep it away from her, and that was where Momo would come up with her plan. Using her creation quirk, she would create sticky bombs with timers on them and place them strategically throughout the room, making sure she didn't give her position away. Finally, she would set off a smoke bomb, and she would wait for the right moment to strike. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the levels of the building, both Izuku and Bakugo's fight would now get more and more intense. The two friends turned rivals seemed to be getting more and more enthralled into the battle, this fight serving more than just as a mock trial event, but rather, this was a clash of ideologies. Two boys who wanted to become the #1 hero, one with an impressive quirk, and one who was born without a quirk. Both of them were special in their own right, and each one had their own burdens to bear. It was simply a matter of who was going to come out on top. As the fight, however, progressed, it became very clear to Bakugo that Izuku still held the advantage. The two of them colliding with one another, before blasting each other to opposite sides of the hall. Bakugo got back onto his feet angered. Despite all the damage he had done to Izuku, and despite Izuku's suit being battered and beaten, he was still able to stand. Izuku had to thank the power ring for that. It was due to the ring's influence and its strength that Izuku was able to still stand, despite all the pain that he was in. The power ring, in a sense, increased the physical power of the user that wore it. With more than enough training, the power ring alone could have made Izuku strong enough, but Izuku didn't want to rely on it, and he didn't just see it in that regard. It was a tool that had to be used in its proper place. At this point, you could say that Izuku was 1/10 of the strength of All Might currently. Even if it was just 1/10, that 1/10 was serving him well in this regard. You think you're hot shit, don't you, you damn nerd? I wouldn't say that, but I think you can see that the gap between us, it's not as big as you think it is. That's bull. As far as I'm concerned, there's always going to be a gap, because you'll never be on my level. I think you're familiar with my quirk, aren't you? I secrete nitroglycerin sweat, and from there creates explosions. Well, as you can see by these two large gauntlets, they channel all that sweat, and they actually store it up. And so, Bakugo would hold up both of his hands, as he was preparing to release both pins from the grenades. What do you think will happen if I let all of that collective sweat go off at once? Underneath Izuku's helmet, his eyes would open in horror. He knew that Bakugo was willing to go through with that explosion, But that wasn't his main concern. His main concern was for the others above, for Ida, and for Momo especially. If Bakugo let that explosion go off, then there was no telling what could happen, and Momo might be hurt. Bakugo, wait! Everyone's upstairs! If you do this, I don't care. I'm going to win. All Might would yell on the intercoms for Bakugo to stop, but Bakugo didn't see any other way. Izuku would focus all of his energies into the thrusters of the soles of his boots. As he rocketed forward, he would go straight into the explosion. As he tackled Bakugo, the two of them would go flying out the window. They would fly about 10 feet from the building as Bakugo's double explosions would go off, blasting both he and Izuku. Half of Izuku's armor would be blasted off immediately, as the two of them went crashing down into the ground below. Bakugo could feel he was in immense pain, and the building started to shake and move as well. Momo wasn't sure what had happened, and she was worried for Izuku, but this was her chance. Setting off the smoke bomb, Ida, his equilibrium being thrown off by the explosion rocking the building, would be unable to stay on his feet long enough as Momo went racing towards the bomb. Ida would try to get back to his feet and rush towards her. However, having realized the path that he was going to take, Momo's sticky bombs would go off at once, as a gelatinous glue would appear out of nowhere, stopping Ida and keeping him in place, keeping him stuck as Momo would reach the bomb and get the victory for her team. Meanwhile, on the ground below, Izuku thankfully was able to quell the explosion, taking the most of it in the brunt of the chest of his armor. While he felt he was in extreme pain, thankfully, the two of them didn't fall from too great of a height, although the explosion definitely did more damage than either of them could have imagined. For Bakugo, he landed into a pile of trash. It wasn't the best, but the debris was enough to break his fall. As for Izuku, the combination of his suit and the power ring was enough to keep him afloat, although he was still in immense pain also. A recovery team would be sent instantly and taking the two to Recovery Girl, where they would spend their time recovering from their injuries. Even though their team had won, Bakugo would still be admonished for his actions, and everyone would worry about Izuku, making sure he was okay. Izuku was fine for the most part, although his left shoulder was indeed separated for a moment, and the pain was much more intense than he could have imagined. Though thankfully Recovery Girl's quirk did enough to heal him, and the power ring kept his body from experiencing much more damage than it would have originally. So for the most part, everyone was fine. Shang would go up to Izuku as well, checking on him and making sure that he was okay. Shang remarking that the power of the ring protected him from an even worse fate. Izuku wished Shang good luck, as he was partnered up with Uraraka to play the role of the heroes as well for their upcoming mock battle. Izuku getting a chance to see what Shang was capable of, he was really impressed with him. But there was one student that caught everyone's attention. One boy that was covered in ice, and his quirk was absolutely marvelous. The boy's name was Shoto Todoroki. Following the mock battles, eventually class would continue on as normal. Izuku and Bakugo would recover and rejoin everyone, and Mr. Aizawa would go over everyone's performance, giving them pointers in areas they could improve in, but also praising them in others as well. One student that particularly caught his interest was Izuku. It was not lost on any of the staff at UA that Izuku's case was a lot stranger than most. When it came to intelligence and academics, Izuku was at the top of his class among some of the best that UA had to offer. If he wanted to get in on general studies alone or recommendation, He could have done so easily, but instead the boy decided to apply himself to the hero courses. This gave them much concern, especially for the boy to not have a quirk, although Principal Nezu allowed the boy to show what he was capable of. And from what they saw at the entrance exam, the boy chose to apply his smarts in his crafting, building for himself suits of armor that allowed him to compete with some of the best. And even without the armor, the boy always showed himself to be rather resourceful, and he had pretty decent strength for someone to not have a quirk. It wasn't anything astronomical, but he was definitely well trained and could take care of himself if worse came to worse. As such, Mr. Aizawa saw a lot of potential in Izuku, and it only allowed him to want to expect more from the other students also. Eventually, it would come time for everyone's first trip to the USJ, where they would be going over rescue training. As Izuku was on the bus with everyone else, he would be sitting next to Momo. Momo being very worried for Izuku, especially after his battle with Bakugo. She had checked on him constantly, making sure he was alright, and Izuku healed up just fine. As they rode their bus to the USJ, she asked what Izuku was going to do in terms of a suit, since his first one got damaged pretty badly. Thankfully, Izuku had made 2 prototypes. The first one that he used for the mock battle was the standard suit that he would want to use for his hero work, although unfortunately it got pretty much wrecked after the fight with Bakugo. That was the red and gold design. The second one that he had in his possession was a much more lightweight armor. It was more of a backup than anything else. He called it the Silver Centurion armor, or the red and silver design. This is the suit that you see in Iron Man 2, the suit that Iron Man uses when he fights against Whiplash on the racetrack. This suit, like the one from the movie, wasn't really designed for full-on hero work, but it's more or less designed to be a backup for worst-case scenario. You could say that for rescue training, this was actually the best time for Izuku to test out this suit and its capabilities. Unlike the first suit, the backup Silver Centurion suit wasn't capable of flight, although he could temporarily jump high in the air. As for its weapons, it had the standard repulsor rays in both palms as well as the chest, although it wasn't as powerful as the first suit. Although thanks to the power ring, it made up for the difference in terms of overall power. Again, this suit was a lot more lightweight and compact, so it wasn't as heavy as the first suit. So Izuku could actually move a lot faster in this one compared to the old one. While Izuku lacked in overall strength from the first armor, this armor made up for in speed, so Izuku could move a lot more quickly if needed. Momo was definitely impressed with Midoriya to see just how far he had come, and Izuku was happy, seeing that he were making progress and getting a lot farther than he ever thought he could have originally. But for Momo, she was just happy to see that the young boy she had met all those years ago was finally achieving the dream that he had always wanted. It was one of the reasons why she was always so impressed with him, even back then. Despite not having a quirk, he didn't allow that to be his limitations, but instead he pushed past it. He was becoming a man that many could be proud of, and she was, among many of them, the most proud. As they arrived, they would meet with the rescue hero, Hero 13. 13 speaking with Mr. Aizawa and remarking that All Might was running late, and that they were probably going to have to start without him. As they did so, however, the doors would close behind them instantly, and they would find themselves trapped inside of the USJ. As from the other side of the facility, a dark portal would open. A man, covered with multiple hands and with shaggy blue hair, would step forward scratching his neck as multiple villains began to emerge from the portals. The young man, with the hands covering his body, would look to the portal warping villain dressed in a suit, referring to him as Kurogiri. The one known as Kurogiri would refer to the young master as Shigaraki. The two of them looking around and wondering where All Might was, as their sources had told them that All Might would be here. But the number one hero was nowhere to be found. In doing so, they decided that they would focus their attention on the students. If All Might was going to be late, then they were going to leave a few bodies for him to find. Maybe that would be motivation. As Mr. Aizawa would tell 13 to protect the students and get them to safety, a dark portal would form around the students, as Kurogiri made his presence known to them. Bakugo and Kirishima would go in for the attack instantly, trying to take down the portal warping villain. However, Izuku and the others would try to stop them, but it would be too late, as everyone would find themselves teleported and sent to different zones throughout the USJ. Both Izuku and Shang-Chi would find themselves in the water zone, along with their classmate Sue, aka Froppy, the frog hero. She introduced herself as the three would make their way to the boat, Izuku donning his armor instantly, and Shang standing at the ready. The three would assess the situation. Seeing the villains coming after them, they didn't think much of it, and Izuku, with a power-enhanced repulsor blast, along with Shang's powerful fire technique, the two would blast the villains out of the way, making short work of them instantly. As they turned to Sue, and they quickly made their way off to the shores, as everyone else would have to fight their way through the USJ, making it to the main entrance, where they hopefully could get out and get help from the other teachers in time. Most of the students were able to make their way back to the entrance, where, after some careful planning and a little luck, they were eventually able to pry open the metal doors. Once they were able to do so, Ida would go racing out immediately, going at full speed towards where the teachers were to alert them of the situation at hand. Meanwhile, Mr. Aizawa would still be within the middle of the USJ, fighting off against the multiple hordes of villains that were approaching him. Both Shigaraki and Kurogiri remarked that Eraserhead could prove to be a problem, and as such, they decided to call out their ace in the hole, as Kurogiri would summon the large, monstrous creature known as the Nomu. Mr. Aizawa attempted to use his erasure quirk, believing that if he could erase its power, then he could take it down, although this would prove not to be the case, as even with Aizawa using his power, the Nomu was far too much for him to handle, as he found himself being beaten down badly into the ground. As Izuku was racing with the others back to the entrance, both he and Shang would see the plight of their teacher. As Froppy moved forward, she turned back to them, asking for them to join with everyone else, and that they were just going to have to wait for the other heroes to come. However, Izuku and Shang remarked that they didn't have time to wait. If they did so, Mr. Aizawa would die. Momo looked on as Izuku stopped moving where everyone else was. She yelled at him to keep going, but Izuku simply remarked that he couldn't leave their teacher behind. With that, they would tell Froppy to get with the others to safety, as both he and Shang would rush back to Mr. Aizawa's side. Their teacher, badly beaten on the ground, had definitely seen better days, as the Nomu was preparing to stomp its foot onto its skull, crushing him and destroying him instantly. From out of nowhere, two blurs would come rocketing forward, Shang with a kick and Izuku with a punch, sending the Nomu flying, as Shigaraki noticed the two heroes standing before him.
So, it seems like more want to come and play the game.
Well, no matter. He'll just leave more bodies in the meantime. I hope you would-be heroes have made your peace. This Nomu of 9, it was made to fight All Might in its prime. So what do you two hope to possibly gain from this encounter? Both Izuku and Shang would stand at the ready, Mr. Aizawa desperately trying to tell his students to flee. However, neither one of them would be able to do so, and instead they pressed on the attack, Izuku channeling the powers of the power ring itself, enhancing the strength of himself and his suit as he went punching, attempting to go blow for blow with the Nomu, while Shang would take out his bow staff, using the fire from the flame ring, and the two of them would do work against the Nomu. For the most part, they were able to hold their own just fine, getting in a few good attacks here and there, although it became very clear that for the two of them, they didn't stand a chance against the Nomu, at least not the way they currently were. Izuku's armor would be beaten off bit by bit, his right repulsor ray being crushed and destroyed. As for his uni beam in his chest, he would launch it at point-blank range at the Nomu in the face. However, this did little more than graze him, as the Nomu would punch him in the chest once again, sending him flying back. As for Shang, he used his multiple forms of martial arts to avoid the Nomu's clumbering attacks, fighting and hitting him from multiple directions, before blasting out a great ball of fire, shooting the Nomu back a few feet. Both he and Izuku would stand back up once again, as they pressed on in the fight. Despite it being an uphill battle, the two of them did a lot better than they were expecting. But that wasn't saying much, as the Nomu was still too much for them to handle. And it seemed as though they were going to be in for the worse, as the Nomu was preparing to launch a devastating punch towards Izuku, Izuku holding up both of his fists in a cross-guard formation, taking the brunt of the attack as he was sent flying back across the USJ. As Shang looked to him, he would dodge the Nomu's first punch, but get hit by the second, as he went flying also. The Nomu went charging towards them, running on all fours, preparing to bash them into the dirt, when suddenly it would find half of its body frozen, unable to move, and from out of nowhere, a devastating barrage of punches and a large set of explosions would blow half of the Nomu's body off. Kirishima, Bakugo, and Shoto arriving to the rescue. You don't seem like you're doing too well, nerd. I've been better. What's the situation? Shoto would ask. This thing was made to fight All Might in its prime, Shang would remark, as all 5 heroes stood together. Dang, really? I would say that's manly, but that's just monstrous. It doesn't matter. Until the heroes or All Might get here, we're the only things holding this thing back. So we're just going to have to give it our all until they arrive. As much as they knew that this would definitely be more than what they could bargain for, the 5 young heroes would stand together as one. If they were going to make their stand, it would have to be now. Both Bakugo and Izuku would jump forward, Izuku with his one good hand repulsor ray, blasting forward with Bakugo and his explosions, followed by Shang-Chi and his fire. Shoto would use his ice, freezing the ground over and freezing the Nomu, as they blasted at his joints over and over again. However, the Nomu's regeneration proved to be more than what they could ever imagine. Not just regeneration, but also in shock absorption and nullification. It seemed as though it were impervious to everything they could throw at him. The Nomu continuing to throw the children around like rag dolls. However, they continued their advance, fighting at him over and over again. Even Shigaraki became a bit concerned, not for the Nomu, but for the fact that these children had no quit in them. It was like they didn't know the meaning of the word give up. Just as it seemed as though the boys were on their last legs, like there was nothing more that they could do. The doors of the USJ would fly open instantly, as All Might would come flying in, punching away at the Nomu and moving them from out of the direction of the children. All Might turned back to the 5 young boys, commending them for their efforts, that they truly showed the resolve of a hero, but that now everything was fine, because he was here. This version of All Might had not given away the power of One for All, and as such, he still had the power at his leisure. Even if he were limited, he could go all out here without any worry. As such, he would go in a full-on battle against the Nomu, the two of them throwing punches at one another constantly. Despite the Nomu's impenetrable power, the boys had done some damage, and that damage was just enough for the symbol of peace to take the victory. As he went beyond his limits, the Nomu attempting to match All Might, and for a time it seemed as though he could do it. But All Might channeled the power of One for All, as he went beyond, going plus ultra and delivering a devastating smash, launching the Nomu after landing 1,000 punches a second, blowing it away and knocking it from out of the top of the roof of the USJ. For All Might to use all of that power and extend himself, it was more so than what he could possibly have expected. As he felt the bellow of smoke forming around him, he knew that he had somehow reached his limit, though thankfully the children were safe and the villains were on the retreat. Shigaraki was angered. This wasn't fair. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. His Nomu had been defeated, and it was all because of All Might. No, not just All Might. Those boys. But his eyes fell upon one, the boy in the armor. He was the one that led the charge. That armored brat, whoever he was, he earned his ire. Shigaraki would tell Kurogiri to form one portal. With All Might just standing there, he saw this as his opportunity. Within a second, the boys would see what was going to happen, and All Might, without even knowing it, would see a portal open in front of him as a hand reached out. Before he had time to react, the 5 boys would stand in front of All Might, all of them ready to defend him at the last moment. However, by chance, it was Izuku that got there first. As he did so, his chest would be touched by Shigaraki, his armor deteriorating instantly until he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He held up his one good repulsor ray, blasting back at Shigaraki, sending him flying, leaving him in immense pain. As the heroes finally arrived, and the villains would have to make a retreat, Kurogiri warping away Shigaraki, who felt as though he had been hit by that of a car. As the villains left, All Might, in the poof of smoke, would transform. The 5 boys, now seeing something they never thought they would see. Standing before them, the symbol of peace, All Might. However, he was not in his buff form at all, but instead, he was in a skinny form. One that was unrecognizable. All Might would tell them to hurry and take cover, as he didn't want anyone else to see what was happening, and he already knew he would have a lot to explain to them in the meantime. The 5 did as he said, and they moved somewhere where no one else could see them, as the smoke and debris was still flying around in the USJ. Everyone else's vision from the far off distance would be obscured, Everyone had many questions. What happened to All Might in his power? Why was he in this skinny form? Did he lose his quirk, or what was it? They had no idea. All Might tried to explain everything to them, although he used the vestiges of One for All to try to keep himself looking normal. However, before any more questions could be asked, one of the boys would collapse on the ground instantly, and everyone turned in horror to see who it was. It was Izuku. Izuku, now out of the danger of the fight, had now realized that he had taken more damage than he was expecting. As he fell to the ground, the boys would flip him over, and they would be horrified at what they saw. Izuku's chest looked as though it had been completely disintegrated, blood spewing from out of its hole. They could see the veins bulging in and out. It looked as though his entire chest area had been completely melted off. The boys would send word immediately for medical aid, everyone gathering around Izuku, telling him to hold on. Izuku, the last thing he's seeing, as his friends were around him, as his vision slowly faded. This concludes What If Deku Was Iron Man? My Hero Academia Armored Adventures Part 2. If you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have on the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange? Naruto Mystic Adventures Shippuden Part 1. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.